Rasputin was debauched that he could make Mama, who was Tsarina, and Papa, the Tsar, do what he wanted them to do, that he could manipulate them. And the fact that the people thought that Rasputin was having an affair with Alexandra. And he wanted Nicholas to believe him, to say, look, here's the evidence, this man has got to go. Nicholas saw the information and he knew it was true. But when he showed it to Alexandra, she claimed it was all lies and that he was being persecuted because he was a saint, and all saints are persecuted.
Not long after, Stolypin was murdered. Shot in the Kiev Opera Theatre whilst attending a royal function with the Tsar. With his #1 enemy out of the way, Rasputin's corrupt influence on government was becoming increasingly evident.
We had 4 prime ministers, I think 5 ministers of the interior, 4 ministers of agriculture, 3 ministers of war.
Instability was seeping through the slack reins of government and onto the city streets. The St. Petersburg papers were bursting with letters from rape victims, crude cartoons, and articles rich with scandalous allegations.
There's a rumour mill which is taking over, and Rasputin is at the centre of all this. And there were all sorts of companies producing postcards, stamps, souvenirs. There's one which is a picture of Rasputin standing behind the Empress with one of her breasts in his hand. And it says simply, "Samoderzhavie," the Russian word for autocracy. So his holding of her breast was a symbol of the autocracy, which was his hold on the whole Russian state.
With the very framework of Russian society in disarray, Russia went to war with Germany. Papers were filling up with the names of dead soldiers.
Russia is at war, it's going very badly, and the Tsar, in what was to be a fatal error, decides to take over the command of the army, leaves the capital, goes off to the front.
And he leaves Alexandra in charge of the government. She is to watch over the ministries. That was her job. But she doesn't do this alone. She calls in Rasputin as her advisor. And from this period on, this is when he's at his height of his powers. She just put her faith and trust in this Rasputin, and anything he said went.
Rasputin's influence was spreading all the way to the front line, with devastating consequences.
Nicholas, as the commander-in-chief of the army from 1915, was obliged to take the advice of his senior commanders, and they were very aware of Rasputin's malevolent influence.
And in letter after letter to the Tsar, you know, we see this pleading, this nagging, this begging, you must do as this man says or Russia will go under, it will lose the throne, you know, our child will never sit on the throne unless you listen to what Rasputin says. And poor Nicholas, knowing what Rasputin was, trying to ignore her, trying to put this to the side, trying not to answer her, but she is determined, and eventually he gives in almost on everything.
By replacing the war minister with Vladimir Sukhomlinov, a money-grabbing, incompetent and close friend, Rasputin signed the death warrants of millions of Russian soldiers.
It was a disaster. You had soldiers without rifles, or you had rifles without bullets. In certain circumstances, they had bullets and rifles, but one didn't go with the other. And soldiers were in summer uniform, and winter was coming, and you had people freezing to death. They were basically engaging in a 19th century war against a 20th century enemy. They were being slaughtered on the battlefields, absolutely slaughtered.
Millions of Russian soldiers were marching towards certain death. As the trenches were filling up with untrained teenagers, generals were taking their own lives.
In 1915, the war turns dramatically for the worse. The German machine of metal breaks through the Russian infantry, forces them into a retreat.
As Mother Russia mourned her loss, people were beginning to demand some answers. All fingers were pointing to Rasputin.
Soldiers' letters back from the front all suggest that they explained the defeat of the army in 1915 as not just the incompetence of the government, but as active treason within it. Rumours were beginning to circulate that there was a pro-German bloc, giving the German commanders secrets about military manoeuvres, in which Rasputin and the Empress were the main culprits.
Palace authorities tried to dampen the stories. Rasputin kept the fire alight by spreading wild rumours about his passionate nights with the Empress.
There was one very famous occasion in the restaurant of the Yard where in 1915 he took a few prostitutes and began to get drunk and to play with the gypsy ladies, and he made these gestures with his hands saying, "Oh yes, I can make the Empress dance to any way I fashion."
Rasputin once ran out on the balcony, waved his private parts to crowds beneath, shouting, "This is what rules Russia."
What counts is not whether the rumours are true or not. It's the ability of these rumours to spread, enter people's mind as if they were truth.
Rasputin had become a living legend, whose own judgment day was drawing near.
Rasputin is demonised. The monarchists blame him for bringing the monarchy down. The people who are opposed to his influence over the monarchy, members of the inner circle of the Romanov family, who see his influence as disastrous, the senior police, senior members of the government. When all of these people decide enough of Rasputin, then I think the final story is already scripted.
In the small hours of a cold December night in 1916, Rasputin was driven to the palace of the Tsar's cousin, Prince Yusupov, for what he thought was a secret tryst with a beautiful woman.
When he turned up in his shiny silk shirt, best leather boots, ready to meet this beautiful hostess, he was invited down into the basement and given poisoned Madeira. It didn't seem to have any effect on him. He was given some cakes which had cyanide. Again, the guy seemed to be as robust as ever. At this point, Yusupov becomes impatient, goes to his office, collects a pistol, comes down again, shoots Rasputin twice in the side. Rasputin falls to the ground. They believe he's dead, and the conspirators take away his coat. In their absence, he gets up again, staggers out of the doorway into the courtyard, where he's found and shot again.
They begin to think that he's actually the devil incarnate, and they can't get rid of him.
Yusupov's frustration was so great that he allegedly castrated the man he referred to as Satan.
They start beating him with a rubber truncheon and kicking him. They finally get him into a car.
They then drive him away and dump him in the river, where he's washed up a couple of days later.
Grigori Rasputin was finally dead. Within 3 months of his murder, the Tsar lost his throne, and the royal family were imprisoned and later executed.
If there wasn't a Rasputin, they probably wouldn't have fallen so fast as they had, and so disastrously. They were really hated, and hated most probably because of Rasputin's involvement with them.
The revolutionaries see him as the embodiment of everything that was evil about the old regime. And they use his image to frighten the people, so that if they betray the revolution, they will get Rasputin, they will get the Germans coming back, everything evil will return.
Rasputin's body was later exhumed and burnt by the revolutionaries as a symbol of the complete annihilation of Russian imperial government.
History Night concludes after the break as we head off to the battlefield to hear about the medicine men who risked their own lives to save those of others.